We're going to now talk about something called a pattern recognition receptor. And this is abbreviated PRRs, pattern recognition receptors. So, there are 3 different types of pattern recognition receptors. So the first type is the most important and the one that we'll talk about the most, and these are called toll-like receptors. Toll-like receptors, or abbreviated TLRs, toll-like receptors. So what are these toll-like receptors? Toll-like receptors are found on the outer cell surface of most immune cells. Okay, and toll-like receptors, they recognize patterns. That's where this name pattern recognition receptors come from. So they recognize patterns of pathogens. So think now back to earlier in the semester. What are some patterns, some things that are unique to pathogens only? Okay, and I'll give you some examples. So some examples, LPS, okay, lipopolysaccharide. That's a unique pattern found in gram-negative bacteria. Another one, peptidoglycan. Remember, peptidoglycan is unique to bacteria only. So this is a pattern of a pathogen. Another one could be some viral RNA. That's a unique pattern of a pathogen. Or maybe some flagella of a bacteria. So there are many different unique patterns that signal that a pathogen has invaded the body. Now, all of these different patterns, we call them PAMPs. I know there's a lot of acronyms, so far we have PRRs, pattern recognition receptors, TLRs, which are toll-like receptors. Now, PAMPs. PAMP stands for pathogen associated microbial pattern. All right, so any type of pattern you would associate with a pathogen is a PAMP. You could also have something called a DAMP. DAMP stands for danger associated microbial pattern. This could be something like a signal from a cell that's infected with a virus. So maybe a signal of a dying cell, or maybe like a exotoxin, any type of danger associated pattern. So we have PAMPs and DAMPs. So once again, toll-like receptors are on the outer cell surface. They're recognizing these PAMPs. Here's some examples, okay? So there's many toll-like receptors. In fact, in humans, there's between 11 or 12 different toll-like receptors. They're still studying the purpose of toll-like receptor 11 and 12. But we already know what some of all the other toll-like receptors do. So for example, toll-like receptor 5, it can recognize flagella. Toll-like receptor 4, it recognizes LPS. Okay, so every toll-like receptor is scouting out, looking for any pathogenic associated patterns. I just want to kind of show you a visualization of what this might look like, okay? So for example, here's a human cell, okay, a human immune cell, and here are the toll-like receptors. These are on the outside of the cell. And now if a pathogen happens to get into the body, the toll-like receptor will recognize the specific PAMP. Okay, so for example, if this is TLR4, it's recognizing the LPS PAMP that's on the surface of the bacteria. what happens when these toll-like receptors notice these PAMPs is it sends a signal to the inside of the cell. So a signal comes in and the human cell says, oh my gosh, there's a PAMP in the area, and it's going to release cytokines. Okay, so cytokines are going to get released. And remember, these cytokines will signal for an immune response. A lot of times, the toll-like receptor will activate cytokines to turn on an inflammatory response. So for example, they could induce pro-inflammatory cytokines if there is LPS in the area. Okay, so those are the toll-like receptors. Now let's talk about the second class. These are called the nod-like receptors, or NLRs. Now, nod-like receptors are just like toll-like receptors in that they recognize a variety of PAMPs. So they recognize many different types of PAMPs. But what makes them different is the toll-like receptors were here on the outside of the human cell. Nod-like receptors are found on the inside of the human cell. Human immune cells, to be specific. All right, so what this might look like, you have a human cell. The nod-like receptors are on the inside. Sometimes bacteria get inside the cell. So we need to have these pattern recognition receptors not only on the outside, but we also need them on the inside, just in case a bacteria comes in. Again, if bacteria comes in and the nod-like receptors bind, it's going to signal for cytokine production. Our final class of pattern recognition receptors are called the RIG-like receptors, or the RLRs. Now, RIG-like receptors, they are found inside the human cell. Just like nod-like receptors, they're inside. But RIG-like receptors are specific to recognizing viruses. And not just any virus, all right? RIG-like receptors are specific to looking for single-stranded RNA viruses. So overall, we have many different toll-like receptors found on the outside of the cell. They recognize a wide variety of PAMPs. Nod-like receptors, which are inside the cell, and they also recognize PAMPs, a wide variety. RIG-like receptors inside, but they're specific to looking for viruses only. Whenever any of these pattern recognition receptors see a PAMP of any sort, whether it be flagella, LPS, RNA from a virus, they're going to signal for cytokine production and they're going to trigger an immune response. So pattern recognition receptors are really the eyes of the innate immune system. And when activated, they're going to trigger further response.